No video game fills me with as much tingly nostalgia as the early Dizzy games. I was 9 when I first played Dizzy, and I still remember the theme music and the various sound effects, especially the noise when you lose a life. Like many British kids of the 80s, I sat at the family ZX Spectrum typing out long programs in Sinclair Basic and dreaming of being a programmer. The Oliver twins, they were like heroes as a kid. I knew nothing about them, but I saw their names stamped on my favourite games, and I created a fantasy in my head of the Oliver twins and me hanging out together, creating Dizzy games and drawing out wall-sized game maps. I never became a programmer, though I did dabble a bit, and nearly 4 decades later, I still have a great fondness for the boxing gloved egg. He lacked the pizzazz of the Mario Brothers, and outside of the UK, he was never quite as popular. In the late 80s and early 90s, everyone seemed to prefer hedgehogs and plumbers. But Dizzy emerged as a hero after the mid-80s video game crash, and instead of costing £20 plus per game, the initial tapes were just 2 or 3 quid. Pocket money games, Dizzy was a hero for the working class masses. After a successful stint as teenage programmers, the Oliver twins joined forces with Codemasters to create Super Robin Hood for the Amstrad CPC, quickly followed by Ghost Hunters and Grand Prix Simulator. The first Dizzy game, as with previous Oliver twins titles, was developed on the Amstrad and ported to the mighty Spectrum and Commodore 64 in 1987. Dizzy, the ultimate cartoon adventure, looked pretty similar across all 3 platforms. The C64 version was probably the best looking version. The Amstrad version had different music, and also music through the gameplay which the others didn't have. But the main character had a green tinge I didn't like. It's like he was covered in moss or something. Personally, I prefer the Spectrum version, but obviously it suffered from the colour clashes famous on the machine. I am biased though, and no doubt you C64 owners will disagree with me, showing off with your 16 colours. The Spectrum might have only had 8, but they were sassy and bright. The title screen music on the Speccy and C64 versions was better than the Amstrad, I think. It stuck in my head, and even now in my mid-40s, I whistle it. Those versions had no in-game music. It was accompanied instead by the metronomic clip-clop of Dizzy's footsteps. The game set up the framework for the franchise. The main character was established as an egg, simply due to its appearance. There were egg-related puns, the spinning jump for which Dizzy gets his name, boxing gloves, puzzle solving, and a fantasy setting. It was a tricky platform adventure. It wasn't just a case of jumping from platform to eventual game completion. The game required you to pick up objects and use them to unlock areas of the game to enable progression. It required logical thought as well as platform precision. There were no game saves back then. Once your lives were lost, then boom, game over, and you'd have to start again, losing potentially hours of gameplay. It wasn't a huge hit. However, a year later, the sequel Treasure Island Dizzy was released. It was a massive hit, and I think most people who played the original Dizzy probably did so after playing Treasure Island and were desperate for more. Treasure Island Dizzy established Dizzy as a quality game franchise. The gameplay and aesthetic felt much the same, but it was devilishly tricky. In addition to the main game, you had to collect 30 coins, and some of those were not easy to locate. In addition, the game had some quirks with the inventory system, meaning it was all too easy to drop an essential item such as the snorkel and end up killing yourself in the sea. The game also only gave you 1 life. 1! You got 5 last time. Everyone who completed Treasure Island Dizzy remembers it because it was not easy. 1 false move, a misplaced jump, a momentary lapse in concentration could mean losing all your progress. I distinctly remember being a bundle of anxiety once I was deep into the game, breaking into cold sweats and taking deep breaths to regulate my breathing as I tried my best not to drown. It's often remembered as one of the greats. Its sequel, however, was even better. Fantasy World Dizzy fixed some of the issues Treasure Island Dizzy had. It had a simple but effective inventory management system, it gave you 3 lives, so you didn't have to be 100% flawless, and it expanded the Dizzy game universe with a raft of additional characters, known as the Yolk Folk. The gameplay was excellent. It felt like the first 2 games, but was a fresh adventure, and is often considered the best of all the Dizzy games. I personally think it is. Although Fantasy World Dizzy was the 3rd Dizzy adventure game, it wasn't the 3rd Dizzy game released. In addition to the main platform adventure games, there were a series of arcade puzzle games. These were spin-offs featuring Dizzy but had little to do with the main games, and often felt like generic puzzle games which simply had Dizzy branding to help the sales. Fast Food Dizzy was the first of such titles, and was clearly a Pac-Man type game. It felt like it had very little to do with Dizzy, and that Dizzy had simply been added later in production, which it had. It was originally meant to be a promotional game for Happy Eater restaurants. A further food-themed title, but with different game mechanics, was Quick Snacks. Both fast food and quick snacks may not have been as great as the platform adventure games, but they were still fun, and for a 10-year-old Dizzy fan like me, I was just happy to see my favourite egg on screen. A fourth platform adventure followed, Magicland Dizzy. Instead of being coded by the Oliver twins, it was outsourced to Big Red Software, who would work on further Dizzy titles. It was well received and continued on with that familiar format. Dizzy had 3 lives and also a health bar, which reflected the gaming mechanic which had become the expected standard on console games. The game was very similar to Fantasy World Dizzy, and once again featured the evil wizard Zax. It was a solid title which delivered more of the same, but still felt fresh enough to excite the Dizzy fandom. Before we got a 5th adventure game, there would be more spin-offs. Dizzy Down the Rapids was a not very exciting game involving going down a river in a barrel and throwing stones or something. It was the first Dizzy game I didn't enjoy. The magic of Dizzy was starting to wear off now. I was 11. Maybe I was just getting too old for this shit. Dizzy Panic was a shape sorting game, which had you making sure falling shapes fell through the correct holes, and Bubble Dizzy had you trying to reach the surface of the sea by floating on bubbles. These were better than Dizzy Down the Rapids, but had they not had Dizzy on the box, they would likely have not done much, and I certainly wouldn't have bothered with them. But eventually, a new platform adventure came. Welcome to Spellbound Dizzy, Dizzy's biggest adventure yet. It was a huge game compared to the previous ones, with over 100 screens. Treasure Island Dizzy, for example, had less than 60. It was more of the same, but with some changes to how you lost energy and the way you manage inventory. It was trickier than Magicland Dizzy, and I suspect many gave up before ever completing it. Perhaps Spellbound Dizzy was a bit too big, and had expanded beyond the limits of the game. Rapids, Panic, Bubble and Spellbound all came out in 1991. It was a mammoth year for Dizzy. And then at the end of the year, Dizzy Prince of the Yolk Folk was released. The 6th Dizzy adventure game, but instead of being a single release, it was an exclusive game which came as part of a Dizzy compilation, so most Dizzy enthusiasts already had the other games that included. Prince of the Yolk Folk looked like the previous adventures, but it felt like it was treading old ground, running errands, rescuing Daisy yet again. It almost feels like a tribute to a Dizzy game, taking aspects of the previous games and mimicking them. The story didn't feel as fleshed out, and although the inventory-based quests all worked, they just felt a bit meh compared to what had come before. Maybe the Dizzy games had had their day. Perhaps sensing this, Codemasters put together a crack task force to come up with a new Dizzy game for Christmas 1992, and they were to charge £10 for it. Spectrum Dizzy games had typically been £2 or £3, so this was a premium price to pay for a game on platforms which were looking a little long in the tooth. Spectrum and C64 machines were already getting packed up and put in the loft. Although the Dizzy games had been available on the next-gen machines such as the Amiga for some time, even the 16-bit Amiga 500 was looking a bit tired compared to the 32-bit 486 PCs. And besides which, the Dizzy games never felt as much at home there as they did on the 8-bit systems. I remember playing Dizzy games on my beloved Amiga 600. It looked great, but it lacked the soul of the 8-bit versions. The golden age of Dizzy ended in 1992 when Crystal Kingdom Dizzy was released. The game on the C64 looked quite different, as instead of importing code from the Spectrum version, it was built from scratch. This meant it could utilize the hardware's 16 colors, and therefore it appeared quite distinct from the Speccy version. Despite the high price tag, it sold well. It even stopped Street Fighter II getting to number 1 on the UK Spectrum sales charts. It's still nowhere near as good as Fantasy World Dizzy, or Treasure Island Dizzy, or even the original Dizzy, but it's a faithful Dizzy game, and it felt like a proper Dizzy game, and players were finally able to control the direction of his descent. It seems fitting really that the Dizzy games ended in 1992, the same year that the ZX Spectrum ceased production. The C64 would eventually stop production in 1994, but Dizzy games never really died. The games were repackaged and reworked for the NES and other markets. The mid to late 90s saw the internet become commonplace in homes, and through websites such as Yolkfolk.com, which was one of the first websites I bookmarked back in the 90s, fans were able to gather, and Dizzy lives on through official fan games and emulation. In 2017, there was sort of a new Dizzy game for the Spectrum, when an ace team of Dizzy enthusiasts recreated the Amiga version of Crystal Kingdom on the Spectrum, pushing the hardware to its limits. And it was in 2017 that the National Video Game Museum, then located in Nottingham, had a Dizzy exhibition which I made a pilgrimage to. And then, in 2020, something wonderful happened. Following a successful crowdfunder campaign, the Oliver twins oversaw a brand new Dizzy game for the Spectrum. The same fantastic team of Dizzy boffins who remade Crystal Kingdom Dizzy produced wonderful Dizzy. And it really is wonderful. If only 9-year-old me could have known that when I turned 40, there would be a new Dizzy game which looked and felt just like the ones I loved. I probably would have looked forward to turning 40 then. So why is Dizzy a pop culture icon? Dizzy, a legendary British game franchise, it promoted long-form gameplay with puzzle solving. The game titles I've listed are the distinct Dizzy games, but there are so many more when you include ports, reworks and exclusives. For example, Go Dizzy Go was an official game in 1992 for Nintendo and Sega consoles, but was based on Quick Snacks from 1990. The Dizzy adventure games were story-driven, logic-based games disguised as cartoony platformers. Through an expanding in-game universe, the Dizzy games and the character of Dizzy became a pop culture icon who helped to define gaming on 8-bit machines and inspire numerous resurrection projects and homemade fan game dedications. On Yolkfolk.com, there are over 300 fan-made Dizzy games available, ranging from novelty titles, improved and expanded versions of existing games, to entirely new games which really look and feel like an original Dizzy adventure. Dizzy sold hundreds of thousands of games, and it all started with two brothers working from their bedroom. Their work and the simple, affordable 8-bit home computers inspired a generation of kids to be involved in computers, whether it be hammering out code or just having fun. There are so many fan-made games inspired by Dizzy, and an online community which keeps it all going. Most platforms have a game which defines them, and for the ZX Spectrum, for me personally, Dizzy felt like something of a mascot. The games were mostly great, the cover art was awesome, and the games didn't feel like behemoth corporate works. They weren't dry, they were full of humour and fantasy. They maintained that spirit of home-coded passion. To complete a Dizzy game isn't just a byproduct of button mashing or joystick wiggling. It takes dedication, brain power, and precision. Possibly a series of tips or a huge game map in your Sinclair User or Crash magazine. In an age of platformers where you sped through courses to collect rings or delved into a sewer system to swim through shit to collect coins, Dizzy offered a slower-paced gaming experience which required more thought. It was the thinking person's platformer. If you've completed a Dizzy game, in my eyes you've achieved one of gaming's highest achievements. And I salute you. Long live the Prince of the Yolk Folk. Goodbye.